I'll write the script using my established knowledge about diatomaceous earth, homesteading practices, pest control industry pricing, and the Reddit homesteading community's common complaints, all of which are well within my training data. Look at that squash plant on the left, every leaf intact, fruit hanging heavy off every vine, beetles nowhere to be seen. Now look at the one on the right, same seed packet, same bed, same water from the same well, planted the same week in May. By August, the leaves are riddled with holes, the cucumbers have stopped setting fruit, and there are aphid colonies on every stem. The difference between those two plants is not a spray I bought at the garden center. It is not a bottle of blue powder with a child-proof cap. It is not a systemic pesticide that cost me $42 and came with a warning label in 3 languages. It is a white powder that has been sitting in the earth for somewhere between 10 and 20 million years, and a 5-pound bag of it costs $8 at the feed store or $12 on Amazon, and it will last most home gardeners an entire season, sometimes 2. My name is Abraham Yoder. My family has farmed the same ground in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, since my great-great-grandfather broke the first sod on that property. I am not a YouTube gardener. I have never taken a course on horticulture. What I know, I learned from watching my father, who learned from watching his. And the chain goes back far enough that some of what we do has no single origin. It is just the way the land taught us to work it. My wife Esther and I raise vegetables, raise animals, and keep a household of 6 running on ground that we own free and clear. We do not have a pest control company. We have not called one in my lifetime. And the reason for that is partly what I am going to show you today. Now I want you to sit with this. In the next several minutes, I am going to walk you through the complete system I use to eliminate insects from my vegetable garden without a single synthetic chemical. Not now, not ever. I am going to show you what this powder is, where it comes from, how it works at a mechanical level that no insect can develop resistance to, when to apply it, how much to use, what mistakes will make it useless, and why the pest control industry, both the lawn and garden aisle version, and the men who knock on your door in the truck, have a very strong financial reason to make sure you never think too hard about this option. I have also put together something Esther and I call the Amish Home Savings System, a full written guide covering the methods our family uses to keep a productive homestead running for a fraction of what most folks spend. The link is in the description. It costs less than 1 bottle of the stuff I am about to tell you makes obsolete. Let me start with the principle, because without the principle, the technique is just a trick, and tricks do not hold. Most people who garden treat their pest problem as a chemistry problem. Something is eating the plant, so you find a chemical that kills the thing eating the plant. That is a sensible way to think about it if you believe a garden is like a machine, an input-output system where you add nutrients at one end and pull vegetables out the other. The garden center sells products designed for people who think this way. 7-Dust, bifenthrin sprays, permethrin concentrates. These are all chemicals that interfere with an insect's nervous system or strip the waxy coating off its body and cause it to dehydrate. They work. I will not tell you they do not work. But they work on every insect, including the beneficial ones. Every time you spray a systemic insecticide on your garden bed, you are also killing the ground beetles that eat aphid eggs, the parasitic wasps that lay their larvae inside caterpillars, the lacewings whose larvae consume hundreds of soft-bodied insects per week. You are solving one problem by creating 3 more, and you have to buy the spray again next year and the year after. The insects come back because you have removed the natural controls that would have kept them in check. The principle I want you to understand is this. A healthy garden does not need pest control. It needs the conditions that allow natural pest pressure to stay below the damage threshold. The insects will always be there. That is not your enemy. Your enemy is a monoculture of stressed plants in depleted soil with no biological diversity above or below the ground. When you have that, the insects win every time, and no spray will fix it long term. Diatomaceous earth does not work like a pesticide. It does not interfere with chemistry. It works like a physical weapon, and that is the distinction that changes everything. Let me explain the mechanism, because once you understand it, you will never look at the garden center shelf the same way again. Diatoms are single-celled algae. They have existed on this earth far longer than any insect, far longer than any flowering plant. When they die, their silica shells sink to the bottom of lakes and ancient seabeds and accumulate in layers that eventually become stone, except it is not hard stone. It is a soft, chalky, crumbling rock that you can grind into a fine white powder. That powder, under a microscope, looks like broken glass. Tiny, razor-edged shards of silica in every direction. When an insect, a soft-bodied aphid, a cucumber beetle, a squash bug nymph, a cabbage worm, a fungus gnat, a flea beetle, crawls through diatomaceous earth, those silica particles lodge in the joints of its exoskeleton and pierce the thin waxy layer that every insect uses to retain moisture. The insect cannot stop it. It cannot evolve around it. There is no genetic adaptation that protects a soft body from being cut by glass. The insect dies of dehydration within hours to a couple of days, depending on species and size. It is purely mechanical. That is why, after 60 years of widespread use, there is not a single documented case of insect resistance to food-grade diatomaceous earth. Pyrethroid resistance is documented in over 500 pest species worldwide. Organophosphate resistance has been a crisis in commercial agriculture since the 1970s. Diatomaceous earth has been cutting through insects since before the pyramids were built, and not one species has figured out how to grow thicker skin. Now let me walk you through how I use it, step by step, because the method matters as much as the material. Done wrong, it accomplishes very little. Done right, it changes what your garden looks like from July through the first frost. The first thing you need to understand is what grade to buy. There is food-grade diatomaceous earth, and there is pool-grade, also called calcined. Do not use pool-grade anywhere near your garden or your body. The calcining process, heating the material to very high temperatures, converts the silica into a crystalline form that is hazardous to breathe and offers no additional effectiveness against insects. Food-grade diatomaceous earth is the one that has been approved by the EPA for use around food crops. It is the one that has an OMRI listing for organic use. A 4-pound bag of food-grade DE runs between $8 and $14 depending on the brand and where you buy it. Permagard and Harris are two brands that have been consistent. A 50-pound bag, which is what I buy at the feed store, costs around $40 to $50 and will last most home gardeners 2 full seasons with proper application. That is your baseline cost. Hold that number. The second thing is timing, and this is where most people go wrong even when they have the right product. Diatomaceous earth only works when it is dry. Water neutralizes it. When DE gets wet, the silica particles clump together, lose their abrasive edge, and lie flat against whatever surface they are on. They are completely ineffective until they dry out again. So the timing of application is critical. You apply in the morning after the dew has burned off, usually mid-morning, 9 or 10 o'clock, when the leaves and soil surface are dry. You do not apply the day before rain. You do not apply in the evening because the overnight humidity will dampen it before dawn. My grandfather used to say that a dry tool does dry work. That is exactly what this is. Apply on a calm morning, no wind if you can help it, because the powder is light enough to drift. I use a simple bulb duster, costs about $6, or in a pinch, a recycled squeeze bottle with a few holes poked in the cap. You want a thin, even coating, not a pile. A pile does nothing extra and wastes the material. A thin, even coat is what creates an invisible barrier. The third thing is where to apply, and the answer is more specific than most people think. You are not dusting the whole plant because the whole plant is not where the problem lives. Insects have entry points. They come up from the soil along the stem. They cluster on the undersides of leaves. They travel from plant to plant through the soil. So you apply DE in 3 specific places. First, a ring around the base of each plant, about 3 inches in diameter. On the soil surface, this stops crawling insects coming up from the ground. Second, the underside of leaves, where aphids and whiteflies colonize a light dusting under the leaf, not a heavy coat. Third, along the top of any horizontal surface, where insects travel the edges of raised bed frames, the top rail of any trellis, the soil surface between rows. Think about where the insect has to walk to get to your plant, and put the barrier there. The fourth thing is the reapplication schedule, and being honest about this matters. After rain, or after you irrigate by overhead watering, you need to reapply. DE is not a set-and-forget solution. It is a maintenance system. I apply once a week during the height of pest season, which in Lancaster County runs from late June through mid-August. If we get a stretch of dry weather, I can go 10 days. After any rain above, about a 1/4 inch, I reapply the next dry morning. In a full pest season, I might use 8 to 10 pounds on a 500 square foot garden. At the feed store price, that is under $10 for the whole summer. 1 bottle of 7 ready to spray costs about $12 and covers maybe 2,000 square feet per application, which sounds comparable until you realize that 7 also kills your bees, your beneficial insects, your earthworms near the surface, and leaves residues in the soil that have been detected in water runoff studies conducted by the USDA, and you will buy 3 or 4 bottles over the course of a season. You will be at $40 to $50 before the first tomato turns red. Now, there is one thing I want to be honest with you about here, because I do not like to oversell anything. Diatomaceous earth works best on soft-bodied, crawling insects. Aphids, thrips, flea beetles, squash bugs, cucumber beetles, fungus gnats, cabbage loopers, mites, all highly susceptible. For flying insects that never touch the treated surfaces, the effect is limited. For large caterpillars like hornworms, the mechanical action is slower because the cuticle is thicker. For hornworms, I pair DE with Bacillus thuringiensis BT, which is also OMRI listed organic, costs about $12 per concentrate that dilutes into multiple gallons and specifically targets caterpillar larvae through a completely different mechanism that is equally non-toxic to humans and beneficial insects. Used together, DE and BT cover the full spectrum of common vegetable garden pests. I have not needed anything else in the time I have been managing this garden. The fifth thing, and this is where it connects back to the principle I started with, is soil health. Diatomaceous earth, when worked lightly into the top inch of your soil, has an additional benefit that almost no one in the mainstream gardening world talks about. Silica is a mineral that plants can uptake through their roots, and silica-rich plants show measurably stronger cell walls, better resistance to fungal diseases, and less palatability to chewing insects. Plants that are silica deficient, which most chemically fertilized plants in depleted suburban soil are softer, more susceptible to disease, and more attractive to pests. My grandfather never knew the word silica. He just said that a plant grown in live ground stands up better than one grown in dead ground. He was not wrong. A tablespoon worked lightly into the planting hole when you set out transplants, and a quarter cup broadcast over the bed and scratched in at the start of the season, that is enough to begin building the silica profile in your soil. It does not replace compost. Nothing replaces compost, but it works alongside it. That is the system. 5 steps: grade selection, timing, application zones, reapplication schedule, soil incorporation. Every one of them matters. Take one out and you will see results, but partial results, and then you will say it sort of works and go back to the spray bottle. Do all 5, and you will see what I mean about the plant on the left side of that image. I want to pause here for just a moment. Esther and I put together a complete written guide, the Amish Home Savings System, that covers this method and about 40 others we use to run this homestead on far less than what the average American household spends on maintenance, food, and home inputs. It is not a course. It is not a subscription. It is a document, like a manual, and the link is in the description. People have told us it paid for itself in the first week. That is not me bragging. That is just what happens when knowledge that took generations to accumulate gets written down in one place. Now, I want to tell you about something my father showed me when I was maybe 11 years old, and I have never forgotten it because it changed the way I understood what a garden is. He took me to the edge of the woodlot at the back of the property, where the trees met the first row of sweet corn, and he showed me that the corn right along that edge, the last 3 or 4 rows before the trees, was always the healthiest corn on the farm, tallest, fewest insects, best ears. And I asked him why, because we were not doing anything different to those rows. He said, "Look at what is above those rows in May." I looked up. The trees were full of birds, and he explained that the birds came out of the trees and worked the edges of the corn rows every morning, picking insects off the plants, pulling larvae out of the soil. The corn near the trees had the birds working for it. The corn in the middle of the field only had us. That story connects to the final and most important piece of this system, and it is the one that gardeners who live in suburbs almost never implement, because no one sells it and no one profits from teaching it. Habitat. Specifically, what I call insect habitat, the conditions that attract predatory insects and birds to your garden and keep them working there all season. Pest control companies sell you a service you pay for monthly. The alternative is to build a system that provides that service for free, permanently, and gets stronger every year instead of weaker. Here is how I do it. Along 2 edges of every vegetable bed, I grow what my family has always called border plantings, flowers and herbs that attract parasitic wasps, lacewings, ground beetles, and hoverflies. Specifically, dill, which is inexpensive and reseeds itself every year, fennel, yarrow, which you plant once and it comes back indefinitely, sweet alyssum, which is a low-growing annual that blooms continuously and is the single best attractor of hoverflies I know, and hoverfly larvae eat aphids at a rate of 400 per larva before they pupate. A packet of sweet alyssum seed costs under $2. It will reseed the following year. You will never buy it again after the first season. Marigolds along the outer perimeter, Not the large hybrid kind, but the small, single-flowered French marigolds Tagates patula, which release a root exudate that suppresses nematodes and also repels whiteflies and thrips from adjacent plants. A flat of those from the nursery runs about $6, or you save seed from year one and you never spend another dollar. What I am describing is a living pest management system that costs almost nothing, improves every year, and works 24 hours a day without any action from me. The insects are always there. The birds are always there. The question is which insects and which birds you are managing for. A garden that is nothing but vegetable plants in rows is a monoculture cafeteria for pests. A garden that has border plantings, habitat structure, and diatomaceous earth as a physical backup is something different. It is closer to the way the edge of a woodlot works. Now let me tell you who profits from you not knowing this. Not to rile you, just so you see the shape of the thing. The residential pest control industry in the United States generates over $22 billion annually. The lawn and garden pesticide market, the products you buy off the shelf at Home Depot and Lowe's and your local garden center, adds several billion more. A standard pest control service contract for a residential property runs between $400 and $1,200 per year, depending on your region and what pests you are targeting. Spray programs for vegetable gardens, specifically the kind some organic lawn services are now marketing, run even higher. That is before you count what you spend on the garden center aisle. The Sevin, the Ortho, the permethrin, the copper fungicide, the neem oil bottles that go rancid before you use them up. Now here's the number I want you to hold next to those. A 50-pound bag of food-grade diatomaceous earth at a farm supply store, $40 to $50. A packet of sweet alyssum seed, under $2. A packet of French marigold seed, $1.50. A bulb duster for application, $6. Total startup cost for the full system I just described, under $60. Total cost in year 2, assuming you save your seed and still have DE in the bag, under $10. The thing is, a soil and a garden managed this way get better every year. The beneficial insect populations build, the soil structure improves, the border plants reseed and spread, the bird habitat matures. Every year you do less and the system does more. A garden managed with synthetic pesticides tends to go the other direction. Depleted soil biology, disrupted beneficial insect populations, pests that develop resistance and come back harder, more products required. One trajectory grows your independence. The other grows your dependency on products. I am not telling you a man schemed this in a back room. No one had to. It is worse than a conspiracy because it is a system nobody had to coordinate. It simply pays better to sell a spray that leaves the garden hungry for the next spray than to teach a man to build a system that makes the spray unnecessary. The incentive is not evil. It is just money following the path of least resistance. But once you see the shape of it, you cannot unsee it. And once you know that a powder sitting in geological deposits since the Miocene epoch, long before there was a pest control company or a garden center or a YouTube channel, kills insects mechanically and permanently without chemistry, without resistance, without harm to your soil or your bees or your children playing near the beds, you start to wonder what else they have let you forget. Esther said something to me last spring that I keep coming back to. She was watching a neighbor from down the road walk his garden rows with one of those backpack sprayers, treating what looked like a flea beetle problem on his eggplant. She said, "He is working very hard at a problem that does not have to exist." That is as plain a way to say it as I know. So here is what I want you to do this week. On your next dry morning, pick a day when there is no rain in the forecast for at least 24 hours. Go to your local feed store or order food-grade diatomaceous earth online. Harris brand or Permagard. 4 pounds if you are a first-time buyer. 50 pounds if you have a serious garden and want to not think about it again until next year. While you are waiting for it to arrive, or while you are at the store, pick up a packet of sweet alyssum seed and a packet of French marigold seed if the season still allows, or put them on the list for next year. $6 bulb duster if you do not have one. That is your whole list. When the DE arrives, go to your vegetable beds on a dry mid-morning and do 3 things. Ring every plant stem with a circle of DE on the soil surface. Dust the undersides of any leaves where you see insect activity or have seen it in the past. Lay a thin line along the top edge of your raised bed frame or along the perimeter of your in-ground beds. That is it for day 1. Set a reminder to reapply in 7 days if no rain falls, or the morning after any rain above a 1/4 inch. Do that every week through August and watch what happens. Then leave me a comment below. Tell me what region you are gardening in. what pest has given you the most trouble this season, and whether you have tried anything like this before. I read every one of these, not out of obligation. I genuinely want to know where you are farming and what you are up against, because the problem is different in Georgia clay than it is in Pacific Northwest drizzle, and I want to be useful to the actual conditions people are working in. Next week, I want to talk about something I have been meaning to cover for a long time: the moment in the growing season